everybody. We're gonna go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. This is a really great turnout. This is a really great opportunity for us to talk about issues that are going on right now at the state capitol, and we appreciate your time. And to respect everybody's time tonight, we want to make sure that we end when we say we're going to end, and that we have a time to talk with everybody that's here after we're done. So. I know, before we start, I know there are a lot of things going on in education right now, a lot of stuff, especially at the state capitol. So for the purposes of tonight, we're going to focus on opportunity scholarships or school vouchers. And there's some legislation moving at the capitol right now, and I'm going to turn it over to Justin here in a second. And I guess I've neglected to introduce myself. I'm Brent Easley with Students First Tennessee. This is Justin Owen with the Beacon Center, Tennessee, and we're here on behalf of School Choice Now and working on Opportunity Scholarship Bill. So we're going to talk about that bill tonight, talk about that policy, and I'll turn it over to Justin to give kind of a rundown of where we're at, where this policy comes from, and what the legislature is doing with it right now.
Well, thank you, Brent. And Brent's been extremely involved in this issue with Students First, and we have at the Beacon Center, and we formed School Choice Now as really a vehicle for parents and community leaders, teachers, others to get engaged in this issue and really make their voices heard, because it is an important issue that impacts families across our state. And ultimately what school choice means is really changing the way we view education in our state. Right now, zip codes determine where your kid goes to school, and bureaucrats and politicians set those boundaries. And so what we want to do is really empower parents by changing that paradigm. We already spend a set amount on each child. We're simply saying allow parents to take a portion of that funding, pin it to the backpack of that child, and send him or her to the school of the parent's choice. And so that's really the crux of what we're working on with this issue. Tennessee has been looking at this probably since about 2010. We started discussing it. We're looking at what other states were doing. Around 2011, Senator Brian Kelsey passed a bill in the state Senate that would provide a very limited scholarship to families. Once it got over to the House side, the governor said, whoa, this thing's moving, I want to take a deeper look at it, and asked the House to pump the brakes, essentially, and allow him to study it more. So the governor then put together a task force and started exploring the issue, looking at ways to make an opportunity scholarship or school choice program fit into what they were doing in terms of education reform in Tennessee. We weighed in on that quite a bit. We surveyed all the private schools in the state to look at how much they were charging in terms of tuition, to see how many open seats they would make to kids who wanted to utilize a scholarship, and all those types of things, really to give the governor's staff and his task force an opportunity to understand what was really happening on the ground in terms of private school options before they started experimenting and crafting a proposal. They came back with a proposal last year that was limited to kids in bottom 5% schools. So if you were in a failing school, you would have gotten to utilize a scholarship. There were some concerns with that not being broad enough and not covering enough families. And so ultimately nothing happened last year. And this year there have been a lot more discussions about opening that up and moving forward with it. Just yesterday, actually, the House Finance Subcommittee passed the governor's bill out with an amendment to it that says if you don't reach enough families in that first bottom 5% category, those first kids in failing schools, then you can open it up to a wider population. There are probably going to be some additional tweaks to it as it moves through the legislative process, but ultimately the proposal will focus on those kids first, those who are really in the worst situations, but then open up to a wider population beyond that. And ultimately our goal is that every family in the state, whether it's through opportunity scholarships or charter schools or online options or your traditional public school, that you as a parent get to decide where to send those kids to school. That bureaucrats or zip codes should not make those decisions, that you as a parent should be the one to make those decisions. So we're here tonight to just have that discussion about this issue and answer your questions about it, and really facilitate a discussion not only with us, but with legislators as this bill moves forward. We expect the Senate to take this up in the next couple of weeks. We also expect it to continue moving through the House. So your voices are very important as you weigh in with your legislators here in Rutherford County and talk to them about why this issue is important to you. So to kind of get things started, one of the best ways to deal with this issue is to combat a lot of the myths that are out there. There have been a lot of misinformation spread from opposition groups to this, and we wanted to kind of address some of those issues as we move forward. So ultimately, Brent and I are going to kind of bat around a few of the questions first, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. One of the things that we hear quite a bit is, if you allow opportunity scholarships, you're simply draining resources from the public schools. I know, Brent, you've dealt with this with legislators quite a bit, so why don't you kind of address the response to that question?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So the way Tennessee schools are funded is through the BEP, is the state funding formula. And those dollars are allocated per pupil. And so the way that the plan is currently crafted, a certain portion of those, the state dollars, and some state required dollars would follow the child if they decided to use this program. So the local dollars, a portion of the local dollars would stay here, and federal dollars would stay here in the local district. So the answer is yes, dollars follow the children, but that's the way that our funding formula is set up in Tennessee.
And in addition to that, I think one critical point to make, the federal funding staying with the school system is very important, because there have been a lot of concerns about federal government encroaching upon private schools' autonomy and curriculum. Well, since those federal dollars don't follow, federal government can't say anything more about it than they already can, and so there's that cutoff there. In addition to that, one of the things we've heard is, well, the scholarship amount won't be enough. Private schools charge $20,000 a year. Yeah, there are some private schools out there that are elite, that charge high tuition, but we surveyed all the private schools in the state and asked them what tuition they charged, and in fact, on average, the tuition in the state is less than $6,000 per child. And so the scholarship amount would be, depending on the school district, anywhere from $6,500 to about $8,000 per child, which is substantial enough to cover that tuition and give parents that opportunity. So we really do believe that this will open up many opportunities in private schools all across the state.
Yeah, one of the additional questions that we get is, how popular are vouchers, are opportunity scholarships in Tennessee? And so there are two specific things that we can point to when we get asked that question. One was a recent poll done by the Friedman Foundation that found 59% of likely Tennessee voters favor vouchers. And then an additional one is another recent poll by Vanderbilt University showing that 2 in 3 Tennesseans would support vouchers or opportunity scholarships in some form. And so, the question that we get from legislators is, how broad is support for programs like this? And so this kind of evidence helps us show that people in Tennessee support that.
And it's important, too, to know that private schools will participate. If you structure a program that is so onerous on them that they don't want to participate, keeping in mind that this is purely voluntary. No private school has to participate and accept children. So you want to structure this in a way that allows them to do it. And there are a few things that have been done to actually encourage that under the governor's proposal, to the point where when we've surveyed these private schools, 80% of them say they either will or would likely participate in a program. So it's a substantial number. A lot of that has to do with the structure of the program, making sure the scholarship is enough to cover tuition, that they're not eating money by accepting a child. Also looking at testing. I'll be quite honest, our TCAP frankly sucks in Tennessee. And so if you force those private schools to administer the state test, many of them are just going to say no. And what the governor has done and the legislature has done is craft a proposal that would give the schools, the private schools, flexibility in the tests they use, so that they would have to test those children to make sure that they're progressing over time, but they wouldn't be forced into a box in terms of what type of test they use. So they would be given some flexibility on that testing requirement. And those things have really helped drive support among private schools to participate in this program. And again, going back to this notion of putting too onerous requirements on private schools, if they came in and started doing that, then the private schools can just remove themselves from the program. There's no obligation whatsoever for them to participate in the program, and we think that's why it's important that it work that way, that private schools remain autonomous and parents be really given control of this system rather it become kind of another government program.
Yeah, the fact that parents get control and get the opportunity to make that decision for their child is a question that we often get. So, we hear questions about how the school board plays into this, and does this take away the autonomy of the school board? And the answer is no. The most local decision is made at your kitchen table. I get to see my kids every single night, so I feel like I know what's best for them. And so that's the spirit of this policy, is to parents making the best decision for their child.
And this notion that school boards are unanimously against school choice, maybe that used to be the case, but there's a growing number of school board members and school board candidates out there who are standing up and saying, you know what, we want to change the way we approach education. And not all these decisions need to be made by politicians. We can trust parents to make decisions that are best for their children. And so we've seen school board members from Knox County, from rural counties, all across the state saying, we support this issue because we understand that it's important. If we're going to improve our education system, we have to do something differently. And you got to think about it. Tennessee hasn't done very well in terms of education. This whole thank God for Mississippi is really not a good solution for our education system. We need to do something differently. And vouchers, we haven't had school choice. So you can't blame school choice for our failures. We don't have that in Tennessee. So we want to try something different and think outside the box. 39 other states, or 26 other states, 39 programs in 26 other states already do this. We're actually falling behind those other states, many of which surround Tennessee. And if they're doing this and we're not, we're at a competitive disadvantage to them. And if you want to talk about the empirical data, that's extremely important as well. We've seen that these programs, they've been studied time and again from government agencies, from universities, from different groups, looking at the impact of these programs. 9 out of 10 studies show that the kids who leave with an opportunity scholarship perform better. And the reason is we have a one-size-fits-all system. Our public education system works for a lot of kids, but it doesn't work for all of them. And we're teaching to the middle. So the kids who are falling behind and can't catch up, they're struggling. The kids who are being held back because they should be challenged more are struggling. This frees them and allows them to look at another opportunity so that they can get the education that they deserve that fits their unique needs. And what we've seen in other states is that actually improves their ability to perform better over time. And then others would say, well, do kids fall behind who remain in public schools? Well, most of you here understand the power of competition. You know that if Publix sets up shop down the street from Kroger, Kroger's not going to start jacking up its prices and selling a crappier product, right? They're going to perform better because that competition encourages them to do that. Well, that's the same thing that happens in education. If we force our public schools to compete for those kids, they actually perform better as well. In fact, 22 out of 23 studies that have been done on the kids who remain in public schools show that those kids do better as well.
And we talk about support from across the state, like we did just a minute ago. I want to make note of one particular thing. A few weeks ago, we had School Choice Week across the nation, and in Nashville, there were several hundred. Justin can give me an exact number. There were several hundred folks that came from across the state and assembled at the state capitol to talk to their legislators. They brought their families, and they spoke out about school choice and why they feel like they want options for their family. It was a great event. It was a great opportunity to talk about the issue. And if you have a chance after we get done tonight, you can go and watch a video that kind of chronicled the event and all the parents that traveled from all the corners of the state.
You can go to schoolchoicenow.tn.com. Your packet should have the email information or the website information. Our Facebook page, School Choice Now, has that as well. It's a really empowering video because it really shows that parents and kids care. We've heard a lot too about this notion, well, parents just don't care, and that's why the school district, the school board, the superintendent, they have to make decisions for families. Well, there aren't many things that parents care about more than the quality of their kids' education. And even parents who have struggled to keep a job and do good things for themselves often go to great lengths to provide their kids with a quality education. And it makes a tremendous difference. I've had the opportunity personally to meet a kid named Marshall Shanks. Marshall is, he's about 14 now. He lives in Orange Mound in Memphis, which is not only one of the most dangerous communities in Tennessee, but in all of the country. I mean, it's It's ravaged with crime and poverty. Marshall had the opportunity through a program called the Memphis Opportunity Scholarship Trust, which is a private voucher program, essentially what we're trying to emulate statewide, to go to a private school all of his life and to really escape those bonds that he was faced with in the public school there. He went to this private school. He's now in high school. And Marshall's talking about what he's going to major in when he goes to college, what he's going to get a graduate degree in. It's amazing to see his story when literally his peers, 14 years old, many of whom are out on the streets, some are in jail. They've turned to a life of crime and drugs and poverty. Some have gotten pregnant. And you would think that Marshall, getting out of that system by being given an opportunity to get a better education, would flee that and remove himself from it. But he cares so much about his community that at 12 years old, he went back and testified in front of the Memphis City Council about how to cure blight in his community, a program he called One Block at a Time, where he identified ways to improve his community, literally street by street, and bring more people back into the community. And this is a 12-year-old kid who's now 14, planning to go to college, completely changed his life trajectory, and the number one thing that did it was that he was given school choice. He was given an opportunity to succeed. And he not only made his life better for it, he's made the lives of many, many other people better for it as well. So this notion that people don't care, that they're not going to do what's best for their kids. Marshall's mom is the happiest person in the world. She actually cut a radio ad for us when we were talking about this issue last year, trying to raise awareness of it. She came and cut this radio ad and was so proud. She's talking about Marshall's going to France so that he can learn French in France at 14 years old. And she's a single mom in Memphis. She was that typical mom who was told by others, you just don't care about the quality of your kid's education. But it has changed not only his life, but it's changed her life as well. It's a very powerful story.
Yeah. So we'll kind of shift gears for a moment, and I know there were two people that I caught before we started that wanted to ask some questions. I had questions to ask. So we'll shift to that, and we'll take a couple of questions, and then after that we'll kind of hang around to answer any specific questions that you all might have about this issue, and if you have questions about another issue, we might have an answer for you. So I know I've talked to Adam Coggin.
Do you want to pop in a little bit so others can hear your question?
Well, first let me say, Justin, Brent, we appreciate y'all coming down, or at least I do, because I know there's been a lot of questions that are in missed, and appreciate hearing a lot of things that you've already had to say. But one of the things going through my mind is, I mean, I know you already said this has been going on in other states. So what's the impact been of school choice in other states that have been doing this?
We see it as a win-win-win opportunity. So what's going on in other states, and what has the impact been? There hasn't been a tremendous increase in overall improvements in those states, simply because as the programs grow, you're only going to have a segment of the population using opportunity scholarships. But the kids who use scholarships perform better individually. They grow at a faster rate academically. Schools that are subject to opportunity scholarships, so that have to compete against private schools for those children, perform better. They increase their output. In Indiana has probably the largest, most expansive program in the country. Their public schools are taking out billboards trying to urge people to come to them. I mean, it's a true competitive environment where they don't just have this monopoly and get to say, if you live in this school district, you come to our school or you go to jail. They have to compete for those kids. And it's amazing to see their response to it. In addition to that, taxpayers save money. Because as Brent said earlier, a portion of the money remains with the public school system. Traditionally, private schools can educate kids cheaper than public schools can. And as a result, that money that's saved is either reinvested back into the public school system, or it reinvested back in some other form of government services so that you don't have to raise taxes elsewhere. So actually, they've wound up, I think Indiana saved $4 million last year compared to what they were spending on public education. They were able to cut $4 million because of this and still perform better. So it really is a win-win-win situation, not only for the kids who use these programs, but the kids in public schools also do better I mean, we wouldn't be advocating for something that caused some kids to succeed and others to fail, because that wouldn't be a great situation. But this really does provide an opportunity not only for kids in private schools and public schools, but also the taxpayers as well.
I think it's a good opportunity to call out some of the other states that are maybe in this half of the United States that have a program in place. So you mentioned Indiana. Alabama passed something this last year. Louisiana has a plan as well.
Florida, North Carolina.
North Carolina.
I mean, we really, if you look at a map, Tennessee is starting to become an island in a sea of school choice states, and Kentucky is right there with us, but I mean, you know, Kentucky is far behind. They don't even have charter schools in Kentucky, so they're really far behind, but that doesn't mean we should just sit on our laurels and wait. If we're going to improve public education and education of all kids in our state, then it's important to look at these types of options.
So you grabbed me earlier.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. You kind of hit on this earlier, but do we know how popular this type of program is in our state?
Yeah, so we talked about that a little bit earlier. There are two recent polls, one from Vanderbilt University and one from the Friedman Foundation. I'm going to pull it back up here.
Yeah, I've got it here. So the Friedman poll showed 59% favor school choice. The recent Vandy poll, I think that was about 6 months or so ago, is 2 and 3, so like 66% of Tennessee. And so, and actually, I was kind of surprised by that it is so high, given that not a lot of people are aware of the issue. But when you ask people, should parents choose where their kids go to school, it's a pretty popular idea, and it's one that's growing. Yes, sir.
The sample size for those polls, and was that the simple question, should they choose where they go to school?
Well, I don't know
or
the
should
exact.
we
I know the Friedman
and let it follow them?
The Friedman poll was a very specific. It explained how opportunity scholarships work and asked, do you support this concept? I want to say the sample size there was 1,000 across the state, and I don't know about the Vandy poll. I mean, they do that every, is it 6 months?
The Vandy poll is on their website. They have a polling department there, and
But I'm not sure
after
what
they
they're.
release the polling, they put it on their website, so you can see the sample size there.
She's been hovering on that.
If the lower or non-performing schools are the ones that are qualified to move students to these scholarship programs, how is it that parents can have a choice? How does that give me a choice?
Well, it gives them first crack. So it says, you know, we're going to give a set amount of scholarships. You get first crack at this. And we expect, given the number of students that makes eligible, you're maybe going to have 1,000 kids from those schools, and then it would open up to more. So you actually...
It's a plan that will expand.
In a second round. So it would first say, if you're zoned for those schools, you get first crack. And if they feel that the governor's plan has 5,000 scholarships in year one and then stair steps and grows upwards.
Are there any limits to how far it can expand?
The governor's bill starts with 5,000 this year and I think goes to 20,000 in year 4. So it stair steps it upwards.
And then it stops there.
And who are these schools accountable?
With the private schools?
Yes. That have our taxpayer money paying for students, to whom are they accountable?
Well, first of all, they're accountable to the parents. I mean, if the parents are not happy with the quality of that child's education, the parent will yank that child out of the school and put them back in the public school.
But there are no elected school boards.
Well, in addition to that, they have testing requirements. They don't have to administer the state test, but they would have to administer a national norm reference test or a state test to show the improvement of that child over time. So that would have an accountability measure. In addition to that, they have to submit financial statements showing that they're not just going to go out of business overnight. You're not going to have these fly-by-night schools. They would have to be accredited by the State Department of Education or recognized in one of their categories. So really, there are a lot of accountability measures in place to make sure that these are legitimate private schools.
What about the charter schools?
Well, that's a whole separate issue. Again, if we can keep it to school choice vouchers so that others can ask their questions.
What I'm concerned about is if we move a lot of kids into charter schools and private schools, that we will lose our control over the education system of our children because we won't have elected people who are in place that we can replace?
Well, my view on that would be that I trust a parent over what's best for their child than I do any politician, frankly. So I'm fine with turning power over to the kitchen table versus the school board. But that's my
And I'll
personal opinion.
mention one thing really quickly about charter schools. Charter schools are public schools in Tennessee. They're accountable to the school boards.
Right.
So
They
It
are.
is a
they
good
are.
point, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, Justin, thanks for bringing this up. I think it's an interesting subject. I don't have kids in school, but I understand the topic. And if I understand correctly, the money that's being used for the scholarships is taxpayer money, correct? And so who is it that's actually choosing who wins the scholarships? Is it
So if you have a situation where there are more applicants than there are available seats, then there would be a random lottery, just like there is with the charter schools. That, let's say you have 5,000 seats open and you have 6,000 applicants. They would randomly select those if all those kids qualify. So there's no cherry picking, no choosing by government officials. They simply do a lottery and rank them based on that random lottery, just like they do the public schools, or the charter schools. I will say, given the nature of the governor's caps and the growth, at least from what we've seen in other states, we're probably not going to have a situation early on where you have more applicants than the number of seats available, just because it's common sense to think you got to educate people about this program, that it exists. That takes time. And usually word of mouth is the best way. You have a few thousand parents that find out about it and take advantage of it in the first year, and that grows over time. So Indiana, with the largest program, now has 20,000 roughly kids, I think, in year 3.
So this is a method of fixing a government-run public school system by sending kids to private school, by turning to the private sector for
By letting parents choose whether they want to put their child in a public school or a private school. Ultimately, we're going to say no longer do politicians get to decide where your kid goes to school, you get to decide. We're simply changing who gets to decide where the money we're already spending on your child, where you educate your child.
right, it's taxpayer money that is going to the private schools.
But the Supreme Court has upheld this as the ability of a parent to decide. Right now, taxpayer money is all going to certain schools because certain politicians have decided, you live in this district, you go to that school. What we're saying is, you can do that, or you can take that money we already spend and send your kid to a different school.
But isn't it true with this bill that if mid-year I'm not happy with that private school and I take my child back to the public school, that money remains in the private school?
It is not true.
So
Actually,
the
that money
will
is
turn around
prorated.
and go back.
That's right. The money is prorated. Yes, ma'am.
I am a parent. I have 4 children. Their ages 5, 8, 21, and 22. I'm very well versed in both the public school system and the private. I've been in both. We paid tuition in both. Or paid tuition and then taxes, I guess you could say. Now, I heard you say earlier, and I want to make sure I understood what your statement is, because this is supposed to be a town hall forum, and I've heard a lot of talking from you two, but not as much conversation, but back and forth. You're kind of cherry picking who you want to have questions here. I understand that you said earlier that you want to make it competitive. You're thinking that if people have these vouchers and they get to choose a private school to go to, that then that's going to make the public school system more competitive, keep those kids in those schools. But the curriculums are going to be different, because in the private school system, each individual private school chooses how they teach those children. A lot of them have classic liberal arts curriculums. Right now, we're going to have a common core curriculum. Those teachers don't have control over what those children are taught. They are taught to a test. And they don't have control over the test because they don't administer it. A third party does that. So how in the world can the public school system be competitive with the private sector?
Well, part of the reason we have things like Common Core is that parents don't even have a seat at the table to push back against this. I mean, it's a system-dominated approach, and the parents have no voice. So if you give parents school choice and allow them to make decisions about where their kid goes to school, then that puts a lot of pressure on the public system to respond to the interests and the needs of those parents. I mean, you hear a lot about this when we talk about these issues. We hear systems and schools and standards and tests and buildings and adults from one side. Nobody's really talking about the children. And that's the purpose of this, is to shift the talk to what's best for each individual child. And parents know that far better than anyone in Washington or anyone in Nashville even. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is to give parents a voice and opportunity to push back against those things they disagree with in the public schools. Because now, if you push back against it, they could care less. If you don't send your kid to their school, they could throw you in jail. So what voice do you have? If you have school choice, if you're empowered to say, well, you know what, I'm yanking my kid out of this school because I disagree with the way you're teaching my child, then you actually are empowered and you have a voice. Yes, ma'am.
I just left the Rutherford County School Board meeting before this, and they have documentation of a lot of money from outside states being channeled through lobbyists going to our politicians here. So how do you factor that as a child first choice? If we have a lot of outside money coming into this state from 30-some other paid lobbyists from other private organizations, how is that standing up for the student's choice? And then you have the virtual schools, which was also a parent choice, and they are doing dismally. And our governor, instead of cracking down on exactly what they're doing, he upped the limit for how many kids could go there. So how do you say that this is good for kids?
Teacher change.
Well, look, I mean, I'm born and raised Tennessean. I went to college right here at MTSU, and Beacon cannot give a single dollar to politicians. So I have no, I just can't speak to the issue of outside money. I mean, parents deserve to choose where to send their kids to school, and that's the bottom line for me. And I believe that, and don't give politicians any money to say that or otherwise. Yes, sir. Yep, you want to go ahead?
Okay, when you mention outside money, not familiar with it, is it not true that Students First did not receive seed money from Eli Broad Academy? Or do they have any affiliation with Prosperity for Americans? Common Core is a corporate down program. It's not a teacher up, and that's a problem because teachers are not involved in anything but being told what they're going to do.
Yep.
Now, the next thing with vouchers, I would like to ask this. If I have a child who is special education, or I have an Hispanic child, do they have the same opportunity?
Well, sure. I mean,
So your private school will have to accept them. That's what you're saying.
The private schools would have to opt into the program. So they would say, we would like to participate in accepting vouchers.
we'll open a
And
set
if they
number of
opt
seats.
in, they're going to accept everybody or no one. Is that correct?
There is no, I mean, the statistics show no cherry picking in private schools with these voucher programs.
Does Harpeth Hall cherry pick?
Well, Harpeth Hall doesn't have school choice. I mean,
Oh, no,
if you
I know
look
that.
at programs with school choice, Indiana, other states, those programs are as diverse, if not more diverse, than the public school
And you'll
system.
find all those states are predominantly Republican governors, Republican legislative bodies that's coming down, corporate down with the Eli Broad thoughts.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I do.
I'm from Indiana, and you've mentioned the money saved by the voucher system for the school system in Indiana. $4 million, I think you said.
Right.
9,000 students.
There'll be about 20,000 this year.
And normally they get about $11,000, and if they go to a charter, or if they go to the voucher system, they get $6,500. That's your $4 million right there.
Right.
Did you not know that? I mean, that's a fact.
Right, you're saving.
I'm from Indiana. They know that in Indiana. It's not an advantage financially, because all it is a less amount of money following from the student that was in public school to the voucher, and that's for $4 million. It's not a big deal. And I'm surprised you foisted that on us like it was some kind of a big deal.
Would you rather educate a child at a higher cost or at a lower cost? I mean, if you can do it at a lower cost,
Just
why
don't,
not
just
do
don't
it?
give money figures that are advantage to the voucher program, because it's only because less money is coming to the student, and they get to save that money.
But the child is still getting a quality education.
I'm just saying,
with
yes, that's your argument, that's up in the air right now, it's still very new in Indiana.
Well, but
Even,
also
you know,
there have been no studies that have ever shown that spending
It's too
more
soon-
on a
it's too
child
soon to do a study in
actually
Indiana.
improves it.
And I got a brother that's in Indiana who's on the voucher program. I'll find out from him what he thinks about it. But he and I disagree on it. I'm a public school teacher, and I just don't agree with how you're presenting it as it's all good. When you say they save money there, it's all because of a default.
A default that educates a child at a lower rate. If you can educate a child for $1,
No,
then let's do
that's
it.
not my point. Yeah, it educates them at a lower rate, but they save $4 million. You say that's gonna save us money? We're gonna have less money coming in, so we're gonna save money.
I could care less how much money we have coming in or going out, as long as we're educating those children and providing them with a path forward to a
Well,
successful.
we disagree on that.
Did you have a question?
I was just gonna make a remark, and I don't make a lot of remarks, but I'm a homeschool mom of 17 years, and it's amazing to me how it's always about dollars and money with a school system. It's not about the children. I'm tired of hearing that.
Yeah.
What you're saying sounds wonderful. I didn't have that opportunity. Would have been great when I was homeschooling my children. I couldn't afford a public school or a private school. Would not have sent my children to a public school and didn't. So.
And you should have had
My
that
remark.
opportunity. And unfortunately, we're just now getting to where we are to empower parents with that.
Do you speaking of her question, do you find in some of these other states that parents that homeschool their kids end up putting them into these voucher programs because they obviously have taken their kids out of public schools? So I'm just curious if there's a prevalence of homeschoolers in these programs.
I would say it's a mixed bag. I mean, once you start homeschooling your child, you get accustomed to that, and a lot of times you keep them there. What we found, interestingly, in other states is that parents do different things for different children, and it goes back to this notion that every child is different. And some children get a good education in a public school. For some reason, another child of theirs needs a private school curriculum with some special focus. Some homeschooled. I mean, we got a representative, Roger Kane, who has 4 different children. All 4 children went to different schools, some public, some private. They've homeschooled. They have figured out what works for each child, and that's really the point of what we're trying to do here, is quit talking about systems, quit talking about schools, quit talking about money in terms of needing to spend more, and start talking about what's best for each individual child. And with that, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. We'll stick around for a little bit to answer any last one-on-one questions you have, but thank you for taking your time out to be here today, and we appreciate it.